Hi guys, welcome to my channel Amie Howard Art. I'm Amie and in today's tutorial video I'm going to show you guys exactly how you can draw a beautiful dog eye study like the one which I have drawn here. So let's get straight into today's tutorial. So with this tutorial I really wanted to put full focus on the eyes of the dog, and I wanted to really focus on all of those wonderful reflections which I could see going on in the reference photo. So before I went in with any colour, I made sure that I had a completely accurate outline, and I made sure that I mapped out all of the shapes which I could see, especially within that highlight area, because that for me was going to be the place that brought this little eye study to life. So once I'd got that outline down, I started to add the colour in the usual way in which I start a lot of my pieces, and that is to gently erase the graphite outline to stop it showing through some of the final layers, especially those lighter layers. And then I went through with a really sharp dark sepia pencil and I gently outlined around the iris, so the coloured part of the eye, and any of the waterlines and the eyelashes and all of those dark parts which I could see within the eye. Once I got those down, I then went through with a base layer of a warm grey one through the coloured part of the eye, and then I really slowly started to layer up some of my brown tones. Now as I was adding the layers down this, I made sure that I kept any of these colours and these layers away from the highlight, so I kept the paper white on that highlight for the time being. So I built up some of the browns, some burnt ochre, some burnt sienna, some walnut brown into the iris itself, and around the pupil area where you've got a majority of that highlight overlapping, there was a really nice purple tone through there. So I went through with some manganese violet from the Polychromos and added that in, and it really complemented those orange and brown tones of the coloured part of the eye. There was also a little bit of a reflection onto the left hand side of the left eye, and there was a reflection of grass. I can only imagine that this photo was taken in a field. So I added a little bit of green, so I used some chromium green opaque, made sure that I used a really light pressure and then blended it out with a white pencil, and that gave me a really nice reflection on that side of the eye. Once I started to add some of the colours into the iris, I then went round and redarkened some of the darker areas. So I went around the outside of the eye once more and underneath that little waterline area. Just went through with a dark sepia pencil, made sure the pencil was really nice and sharp to get those lines really precise and crisp. And then once those were a dark enough tone, then I turned my attention to that highlight. And this was a really fun part for me to create. So I could see a reflection of somebody holding a camera in the dog's eye, and I really wanted to convey that and really convey the aspect of realism of this eye study. So I started off just by mapping in some of the darker areas and adding a base layer. So I went through with a base layer of some warm grey one once again, and then I went through with the dark sepia pencil and I just mapped in all of the dark areas and started to flesh out the shape of somebody reflected in the eye. And this person was also holding a camera as well, so I made sure that I fleshed out some of that. Now as these were really small details in here, you have to make sure that you have a really sharp pencil. So I was constantly sharpening my dark sepia and all of my other pencils to make sure that I could maintain really fine points and get in those really fine sharp details. Once I'd mapped in those darker parts of the highlight, then I could go through and add some midtones and flesh it out with a little bit of colour. So I added a few blue tones, I added some sky blue and some dark indigo. I also added some burnt sienna and burnt ochre, so replicating those brown tones which were going on through the iris, and also adding a little bit of manganese violet for some shadows and to accent some more of those orange tones within there. Once I'd got that highlight in, then I went through with a really sharp dark sepia pencil once more and just crisped up some edges of the surrounding eyes. So I added some more tone to the upper eyelid and then going around the iris, the whole thing once more. And then I went through and blended a few areas with the Caran d'Ache Luminance white pencil. So one tip that I have for you for keeping your irises and your eyes really nice and smooth and glassy looking is to use really small circular motions with your pencil. And that really helps because you can get all of the colour into the hills and valleys of the paper. You can really fill the paper with your tone and you can get a really nice smooth look. If you went in and shaded back and forth, you'd end up creating some kind of line, whereas if you use that circular motion, you get rid of any lines and you create this really nice smooth surface. So when you are drawing eyes, make sure that you use small circular motions with your pencil and make sure that you blend out to make it really nice and smooth. And you can blend through burnishing like I've done here, or you can use a solvent or whatever method that you are comfortable with using. Once that eye was complete, then I turned my attention to all of the fur surrounding the eye, and the fur surrounding was a really nice rich black colour, and I always love replicating this colour fur. It's one of my favourites and it's really simple to do. So around the eye there was a lot of a lighter area, and I started off by putting down a base layer of some warm grey one and some cold grey one. I just layered those on top of one another, making sure that I had a really sharp point to my pencil to maintain a really nice smooth colour lay down. Once I got those base layers down, then I went through and added some tones which I could see laying on the skin. So as I said, the area directly around the eye was actually quite light, and there was this really nice purpley brown tone showing through from the skin underneath that fur. So to replicate that colour, I actually went through with a Prismacolor pencil, and the Prismacolor that I used was greyed lavender, and this was a really beautiful colour to use for those undertones on that skin. So all I did for those was just shade back and forth, following the fur direction and just making sure that I kept a sharp point on my pencil to maintain that nice even colour lay down like I did with the base layers. And then I just really subtly blended it out just by lessening the pressure on my pencil as I got to the end of that sort of lavendery toned area that I could see. For the more brown tones, I just went through with a bit of burnt sienna, again making sure the pencil was nice and sharp, using a really light pressure and just putting minimal colour down onto the paper just to kind of hint that there's a little bit of a brown tone laying on that skin. Then it was time to go through and add all of that lovely fur texture and really build that black tone of the dog. So my subject was actually quite short haired, so I had to make sure that I used shorter fur strokes with my pencil. So I went through, I sharpened up my dark sepia pencil, and then I went through and started to add these fur lines. So I made sure that I checked with the reference photo the direction of the fur, and then I started to add those fur strokes in. So to add those fur strokes, all I do is just put my point of the pencil down on the paper and then move my pencil in the direction that the fur is going and gradually lift my pencil as it comes towards the end of the stroke. And you get this really nice tapered line, and you can fill your area with them, and it ends up looking like a really nice soft fur. So that's all I've done throughout the entire fur of this portrait. I've just made those lines, and where you've got slightly darker areas, all I've done is just grouped some of those fur lines a lot closer together so they're really concentrated in one place to try and convey that darker aspect of the fur. To really darken up some of those areas, I had to go through and use a little bit of a black pencil, and all I did was make those fur strokes exactly the same as I did with the dark sepia pencil. To really darken them up further in certain areas, I just glazed some of the dark sepia over the top, so just really lightly shading just to try and add a much darker tone over there. And I also glazed a little bit of the black pencil over as well. Where you've got the lighter areas of the fur, they were actually more of a grey blue tone. So in those areas, I've actually grouped a lot less of those fur lines. So in the darker areas, they're really concentrated, and in the lighter areas, they are more sparse and sort of all over the place. And I've done that so that you get this representation of the dark and the lighter fur, so you can sort of see the bone structure and how the light is playing on the fur. Also in those lighter areas, I've gone through and glazed over a few blue colours. So I've used a sky blue and a little bit of some dark indigo. And then I've gone through and also shaded with some Payne's Grey 30% from the Luminance. And with those blue and grey tones, all I've done is just shaded back and forth, just glazed a really light layer on top of some of those fur lines. And I've also gone through and made some fur lines with those pencils as well. So as I've made my way across the portrait, through the middle there you've got a really light section and it's actually toned with a lot of brown. So all I've done there is put down those base layers and then started to build up that fur using those fur lines with a dark sepia and a black pencil. And then I've gone over and glazed some colours, so really gently layering over. I've used some brown and then I went through with some more of those blues and greys, and I've also gone through with a little bit of some manganese violet and some greyed lavender from the Prismacolor. The right hand eye was rendered in exactly the same way as I explained for the left hand eye. I've gone through and erased the graphite, and then I've gone through and added some dark sepia over that graphite to get the shape of the eye back in. Gone around the waterline, added in the eyelids and that sort of thing. Then I've gone through and added some base layers to the iris and then built up those brown and orange tones within the iris, added in that little highlight of green that's reflected on this eye as well. I've added some blues and browns to create my own kind of dark colour, and then I've gone through the highlight and applied exactly the same process. So all I did for that was just add some base layers down, then gone through and added in the darker areas and then fleshed out some of the tones, so the mid-tones, so you've got those kind of light greys, a few browns and some purples through there. The fur around the right hand eye is replicated in exactly the same way as well. So I've gone through with base layers and then added in some of the tones which I can see lying on the skin. So I've used that greyed lavender once more. I've used some burnt sienna, some manganese violet. Really made sure that I blended them all together and used really light pressure to kind of limit the amount of pigment going down. And then I've gone over with some dark sepia and some black fur lines and just made sure that everything blends really nicely together, and also added in those tones of blue and grey into those lighter areas as well. So that's pretty much all that I have for you guys today. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and enjoyed the techniques and everything which I have shown throughout. If you want to follow this along in real time, then there is the full tutorial available over on Patreon and for my website subscribers. So if you want to follow along, I'll pop the link in the description for you if you want to go and check that out. But if you don't want to follow that along, then you can use this tutorial, and I will post a link to the reference photo from Pixabay which I have used in the description for you guys as well. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, then make sure that you give it a big thumbs up. And if you're new around here and you really liked this tutorial and you want to see more, along with art advice and draw with me live streams, then make sure that you hit that subscribe button and tick that bell icon to be notified of all of my future videos straight to your email box. And there are some more videos which I think you're going to love just over there, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!